G'day scamps and scallywags, I'm Otisius and welcome to my channel. Today we've got what I'm going to call a review of the GMMK White Ice Edition keyboard from Glorious PC Gaming Race. Now, I hadn't initially planned to review this board, or even hardware at all for that matter, but what started out as taking some video of the pretty lights with my phone, well, it kind of got away from me and we ended up here. This is going to be my first video, and I do hope you enjoy the content. But even if not, you might want to stick around anyways, as I'm told the sound of my voice can lull you into a very restful sleep. So, on to the board right after the thingy. This is the new glorious GMMK White Ice Edition, and it's almost certainly a keyboard. But is it also something more? Now, you might notice some inconsistency with the audio in this video. And that's because I actually had a microphone die on me during the recording. Well, not so much die as was murdered. By me. Until recently, I'd been eyeing the old G810 with growing contempt, especially after watching some of the excellent content from the admirably bearded gentleman over at Bad Seed Tech. You could say I'd finally been inspired to dip my toes into the murky sulfuric waters that comprise the custom keyboard onsen. But before we get in any deeper, I'm going to tack a little disclaimer onto this review.
I'm in no way a custom keyboard expert, nor do I claim to be any kind of authority on building one.
So you might then be asking, well, what kind of stock are we supposed to place in your opinion here then, bucko? And my answer is, if you're already an aficionado in this domain, probably not a lot. But if you're someone like me that has a gaming keyboard that's getting a little long in the tooth, and you're considering a board like the GMMK as a sort of entry point into the world of custom keyboards, then hopefully I can provide a little insight into how this board works as a step in that direction. Now, my board happens to be in the 10 kilos format, but there were also a full-sized and a 60% compact version on offer. Might be worth noting that the full-sized is the only format that has a fixed cable and doesn't offer the detachable USB-C cable that the compact and TKL do. Unlike the previous version of the GMMK, the White Ice Edition only ships pre-built, meaning you're getting Gateron Brown switches and white ABS caps, with no other options available and currently no bare bones version on offer either. What it does share with that version is that it is hot swappable, meaning you can change the switches to ones that you prefer. So I'd been looking for a new keyboard for a while, and something that met all the criteria in terms of price point, features, and options just never quite materialized. What have we here? New improved stabilizers, detachable USB-C cable, aluminum top plate, and hot swappable switches. Could this be the gateway board that would allow me to scry the arcane realm of custom keyboards? The glyph on the wall of the antechamber that is the key to understanding the ritual.
Alright, whoa, glyphs. I'm sorry, Count Dorkula, are you lost? Allow me to point the way back to Nerdsylvania.
Unfortunately, this board was already on my desk at the time I decided to make this review, so there won't be a true unboxing. But if you're willing to play along, I've painstakingly created a reenactment for you. And I can assure you that no expense has been spared to recreate that experience for you. USB cables that were once plugged have been unplugged, cords recorded, materials rematerialized, keycaps recapped, all with the utmost attention to detail and accuracy drawn from historical records. Sticker seals that were broken were replaced with fresh seals and broken again, Off camera, of course, is not to unsettle any of the more sensitive viewers. So as you can see, we have a pretty standard white braided USB-C to USB-A cable. We also have a couple replacement keycaps. One for the escape key in case you aren't a fan of that yellow-orange ascend cap, and another one featuring the glorious guy. As much fun as it is to have a wacky key with a beard on it, some of the more finicky among you might bristle over the fact that this key doesn't quite match the same shade of white as the other keys. We've also got an included switch puller and some spare feet. All welcome inclusions, to be sure. And one more thing I probably shouldn't bother to mention, but will anyways, is that although the keyboard arrived in good condition, the box certainly did not. It seems the board was just shipped in its retail box inside a shipping envelope, and there were some dented corners and some flattened edges. Before discovering that the board itself was fine, to be honest, I was a little bit nervous about what I was going to find when I opened it.
But why do we care about the goddamn box? Why?
Because I know that there are some of you out there that like to display that box. So I'm just letting you know what you might be in for. So before we talk about the board's design and build quality, we should probably first talk about the price. For simplicity's sake, prices are approximate and in USD. The White Ice Edition comes in at $110, and while there are of course an ever-growing number of competing boards, if what you're looking for is an aluminum-cased, hot-swappable board that sits in a price bracket well under the majority of flagship gaming keyboards, I think there's still plenty of reason to give this a serious look. What about the competition? I actually shot a whole thing comparing some of the features of the White Ice to other boards like the Keychron K8 and boards from Drop, but then that started to get away from me too, and this is running long already, so we'll just go with the abridged version. Why did I pick the GMMK over the other boards? The GMMK seemed the most well-rounded at its price point, but the biggest reason was simply ease of use. It's probably going to seem like a little bit of irony once we actually discuss the GMMK's software, but it was the fact that none of the other boards I'd considered had any real companion software to make lighting changes and programming functions or macros easier, if at all, whereas Glorious provide an app. I really like the look of this board. It doesn't really match anything else in my setup, but to be honest, I'm smitten enough with it that I don't really mind. To my surprise, how much I like the look has actually made it more difficult to decide on upgrade keycaps, because I'm not really sure how much I want to change it. Its unadorned minimalism gives it a kind of understated elegance, and its uniformly clean lines give it an appeal that you can appreciate from pretty much any angle. Nothing here screeches a gamer war cry at you, and I think this could be considered a tasteful bit of restraint from a company called Glorious PC Gaming Race. The pale shade of the aluminum top plate and that sort of frosted finish reflects a lot of light from under the caps, and diffuses it in a way that gives each key a pronounced but soft-edged halo, an effect that might be best described as glorious. A glorious guy? As I mentioned, the keycaps are double-shot ABS, and the legends are actually really nice. I'm a fan of the font choice, and I think it complements the overall aesthetic. I'd also say that the keycaps have a good feel to them. There's more texture to them than other ABS caps I've used. Taking a look at the underside of the caps, you can see that there are some rough notches along the top edge of the cap, presumably due to the molding process, but none of that was visible from the outside. Overall, I think everything in terms of the board's presentation works. It may well be that there are other options out there that are brighter in terms of lighting, and PBT caps would have been a nice inclusion, but I'm not going to deny that the board makes a good case for itself as a complete package in terms of aesthetics. The board feels pretty solidly built, even considering its relatively trim profile, and there was no creak or flex even when put under an unreasonable amount of strain. And that might actually be due to that plastic bottom piece that isn't actually a thin piece of plastic but a pretty substantial ABS plate. The closest thing I can compare it to is, you know those melamine dishes you take to go camping? That really dense hard plastic? Sure you do. Well, it's like that. And as you can see, the back of the board maintains that all-white theme with only the included key puller standing out. Now, I love the idea of being able to store the cap puller under the board, but I gotta say, I found it impossible to get it out of there without implementing some other implement. I actually went fishing back in the box for the switch puller to dislodge the cap puller from its lodge. And that seemed like kind of an oversight. I think there was still plenty of real estate left to store the switch puller on the back too. I could always go looking for some tweezers to get that one out. Echoing that yellowy-orange Ascend keycap from the front. Even the rubber feet are white and have this nice knurled sort of texture. I've heard at least one reviewer complain about the board not having enough grip on the desk surface, but I found it sufficiently grippy on my desk and even more so on a desk mat. If you need a little more height or angle, there are also flip-out feet, and these also have rubber feet. And these offer roughly the same amount of grip on the mat. It really takes some effort to get it to slide around, and it never moved on my mat unintentionally, even during the most frantic gaming sessions. On to the switches, the aforementioned Gateron Browns. Gateron? I don't know. I didn't really want to include any assessment of the switches, as a big selling point of hotswappable boards is that the buyer can choose whatever switch meets their particular preference, along with the fact that admittedly I don't have extensive experience with a lot of different switch types. But unfortunately, because Glorious hasn't given us any more switch options to choose from, or a bare bones version, I feel like it would be kind of a mistake not to give potential buyers who aren't familiar with the Browns some idea of what they're like to use. Gateron Browns are what this board ships with. Anyone who buys this board will be paying for them, and so I feel I should err on the side that they will be used. If you're looking for any in-depth discussion of switches, there are plenty of excellent creators out there who are far more knowledgeable on that subject than me, and I would defer to them 100% of the time. And I will have provided links to some of their channels in the description. So, the Browns. I've been using them for a couple months now, while I try to decide on what I want to replace them with. And so you know where my bias lies? I prefer fast, silent, linear switches. And for those reasons, I'm not a huge fan of these switches, because they aren't really any of those things. They might be just right for Goldilocks, but as someone who doesn't enjoy sound or tactile feedback coming from my board, even the Browns, which would rank really low on either of those scales, to me are like, I know I'm typing. Do you need to know I'm typing? I rarely forget that I'm typing when I'm at a keyboard for hours. Hey, where'd all that typing go? Oh, there it is. It was right under my nose the whole time. It might seem like I'm just being facetious here. I should make it clear. I'm trying to shame people who don't share my preference, and alienate as many potential viewers as possible. It's how you find out who your real friends are. Like my grampy always said, boy, you don't make friends with the faceless internet. They'll despise you in the end. Think you're weak. Now pass me that tin of snuff, you little shoop. I'm going in the room. The wrestling's pretty near on. Some of that might be from a movie, but the real takeaway, I think, is you shouldn't be afraid to talk at length about something you know very little. It's all part of making it up until you've faked it, or however that goes. Alright, aside from that, they're okay for typing. But for gaming, especially for those of you who are like myself, coming from a gaming keyboard with short actuation distances, playing something fast-paced, I really did notice that I felt just a little bit less agile. This is despite them being the same on actuation force at 45 grams. Recognizing that I'm in the minority on this one, and more of you will be into how these things
sound
than I am, I'll let you have a listen to the key presses on the Browns, followed by the old Romer Gs, just for a little comparison's sake. Terrible stabilizers aside, I think it should be pretty clear that the Romers are significantly quieter, and therefore better. Just before we get to the board's software, let's talk about the kind of utility you're going to get out of the board's baked-in function layer commands. And it's actually a lot. Holding down that function key, you can choose from one of the board's many lighting animations. You can adjust the brightness of the lighting, the speed of the animation, and the direction it cycles in. You can even set per key lighting via the function key, but that probably would be a tedious process. And you'd be limited to a palette of only 8 provided colors rather than the entire color wheel that the software gives you access to. You also get some quick launch hotkeys, along with standard media controls and volume and muting. And you can quickly flip over from one of those default animations to the first of 3 custom user profiles. To get to the other 2, you have to use the software. And the software isn't great. Considering the relatively basic functionality it provides, it still somehow manages to be pretty wonky to use. The good news is you probably won't need to interact with it very much. If you're coming over to this board from one of the big brands like Razer, Logitech, Corsair, or SteelSeries, you might be used to one of those comprehensive software solutions that covers the majority of their peripherals in a single application. And for better or worse, that is definitely not the case here. Personally, I'm not a big fan of the big bloated ecosystem style apps that want to run all the time, or worse, require a login. I'm happier with something that'll let me set up my device how I want, save those settings to that device, and then get unceremoniously uninstalled. Fortunately, as with their other devices up to this point, that continues to be Glorious' approach to software. Once you've set things up the way you want, you can pretty much forget about the app. The downside is that when you do have to use it, let's say to change some of your perky lighting or create or edit some macros, you're going to feel every bit of that disposability. I found it to be janky and unintuitive, and the weirdness really begins even before you get the app installed. Up to now, each Glorious device gets its own Glorious app. At one point I had 3 of them installed on my system. And it would seem, at least at first, that the white ice is no different. The user guide in the box directs you to a support page where you're supposed to find the software. That page then tells you to download the appropriate software based on the first 4 digits in your serial number found on your board. Mine happens to be 2020, but as you can see, 2020 doesn't appear anywhere on the list, and you just kind of have to assume that your number is included in Other. And this is still the case months after this board's release, even after it having become a permanent member of the lineup and a recent overhaul of the Glorious website. I don't see why they couldn't add a couple more numbers to the header here just to assuage new buyers' fears of picking the wrong thing and bricking their new keyboard with a bad update. What have you guys got against 2020, Glorious? Oh yeah, okay. Once you have that installed, it quickly becomes clear that Glorious aren't done making odd choices. Let's start with when you fire up the software and see that your lighting mode appears to be disabled, even though it clearly isn't. Turns out this enabled disabled thing is actually some kind of safety switch just to make sure you don't accidentally edit your lighting without meaning to. And then you might notice that the default report rate is set to 125 Hz, the very lowest available setting. And then there's these tiny little icons that have no mouse hover description. And no, I'm not going to tell you what they are, because it should be obvious, shouldn't it? Smarty pants. So after having spent some time setting everything up the way I wanted it, the next logical step is to save and exit. Right? No, I'm really asking, because the way this app is gaslighting me, I'm not really sure of anything anymore. Maybe I was being unreasonable. As you can see, there is no save button, and all the other buttons are grayed out, so I thought, maybe apply? But apply isn't a real button. It's just app lies. So then I hovered over the OK button. Yeah, that's gotta be it. Everything looked good. I closed the app and my lighting changes remained. Until I rebooted my PC and all my beautiful static per key lighting was gone. So I went through the whole process again, this time trying to figure out where I'd stepped wrong. What can I do to appease this Glorious software so that it deems me worthy of saving my profile? Maybe I have to give it a unique name for it to be saved. Let's try that. So I hit OK again, and exited, and once again everything remained the way I'd set it, until my next reboot. So I did a frustration Google, and what I came up with was that the software needed to be run as administrator. I couldn't find any mention of that fact in the included guide or on the software page. So I'll wrap it up with a little demo of the lighting effects to give your eyeballs something to have a look at while I drone up a storm of a final verdict. Also because I ran out of B-roll footage. First off, I've got to say that it is a bit disappointing that by this point the White Ice Edition is still only shipping pre-built. Now, I'm not going to dock the board any marks specifically for the Gateron Browns, because when it comes to switches, it really does come down to preference. Where I will have to mark a strike is for Glorious not offering any selection in switch types at all. And you know, I probably wouldn't have held that mark against the board had I reviewed it back when I first got it in July, because at that time the board was part of a limited run, and some caveats can be excused if not expected when you make a decision to buy something as part of a limited run. But Glorious had stated around the time of release that they intended to bring the board back as a permanent addition to their stable, and that was going to be at some point in the fall. If you had asked me at that time, I probably would have put money on this board shipping bare bones or at least with several more options by now. Here we are, almost 5 months later, and the White Ice Edition is still only being sold pre-built. That's going to count for a point. The other half a mark is really just the sum of some small complaints I have with the board, like the software being a bit of a mess, ABS caps instead of PBT, and the fact that this board only accepts 3-pin switches. Something that may be worth noting is that Glorious also seem to be working on some unified software of their own. This software, which they've called Core, is currently only available to users of the recent Model O wireless, but Glorious has said that they will be incorporating more of their devices going forward. So soon White Ice owners might be able to replace their disposable software with what I hope is superior disposable software. As I said at the outset, the purpose of this review isn't to tell enthusiasts things they already know. It was to determine if this keyboard is worth the money for people coming from a less recent gaming keyboard, and what they can expect if they make that move. And ultimately, I think the White Ice Edition can offer those users quite a lot if they aren't looking for a better gaming keyboard out of the box. I think the board represents a great platform for users to experiment and find out what suits them, especially newcomers to the world of customizing keyboards like myself. It's accessible and succeeds at being that entry point by merging a good deal of flexibility and features that not long ago would have been reserved to boards costing significantly more, with a really nice bit of design. There isn't really anything that it claims to do that it fails to deliver on. This board keeps all of its promises. A lot of flagship gaming keyboards these days are commanding in the neighborhood of $200 and offering a lot less in terms of build quality. So I think if you're interested in customization, or you want to find out if you're interested in customization, the White Ice Edition at $110 continues to represent a pretty good value. And so for all those reasons, on my silly inverted scale ranging from 10 to 0, with 10 being the maximum number of bad things or unsurpassably awful, and 0 being 0 bad things or perfection, this board gets a 1.5. You could call that an 8.5 out of 10, but you'd be missing the point. 1.5 questionable egg salad sandwiches of inscrutable age or origin is not the same as 8.5 of them. From a consumer standpoint, I think it's a good thing for everyone, the more boards like this that start to push the boundaries of the mainstream into territory that was traditionally only occupied by customs, and Glorious seem intent on being one of the outfits to lead the charge. Now, to be fair, there's still quite a bit of ground between something like the GMMK and a true full custom build, but that distance is maybe just a tiny bit narrower than it once was. There will of course always be a place for those sky's the limit custom builds and those handy with a soldering iron, but making more of the benefits of custom keyboards accessible to more people has to be a good thing, especially since the price tag of a fully custom build will keep them out of reach for most. And just in time to muddy the waters a little before wrapping this video, Glorious recently announced the GMMK Pro, which they're calling An ultra-premium gasket-mounted 75% layout keyboard built for enthusiasts, gamers, and professionals. And that board will be offered bare bones at a price of $170. It'll also accommodate 5-pin switches natively and will feature screw-in stabilizers that come pre-clipped and lubed, along with south-facing switches. That board could represent an even more enticing proposition to some by pulling down even more of those premium features for a $60 price increase. Glorious claim that this will be the highest quality keyboard at this price point on the market. And that board is supposed to drop Q1 next year. I guess we'll see at that time if Glorious continue to make good on their claims. Until then, there's just one claim they've made that's becoming increasingly suspect. Well, that's going to be it for the review. I do hope it left you with something of value. And remember, if you like knowledgeable, polished content with jaunty, slick delivery, you've come to the right place. For a recommendation, which you'll find linked in the description below. And though that's it for our time together today, I do hope you won't hesitate to leave a comment. I'd love to know what you think I got wrong in this video. So, until next time, thanks for listening. You've been good company. And though that's it for our time together today, I do hope you won't hesitate to leave a comment. I'd love to know what you really think of egg salad sandwiches, or whether you felt pressured to watch this video all the way to the end because I personally sent you a link. Or really anything other than what you think I got wrong in this video.